Well, good morning. Welcome to another Bible Studies for Life Sunday School lesson. We have been walking through in the past several weeks the different aspects of the Ten Commandments. Today we're going to look at honor your marriage. And so we've been talking about, like I said, placing God first, honoring God, honoring your parents, honoring life. Today we're looking at the honor your marriage or the do not commit adultery. We're going to be looking today at the lesson of David and Bathsheba, a very popular, a very well-known story in the Bible out of 2 Samuel chapter 11. And a question that we're going to start off with, one that I want you to think about at home, and one that I think is very important for us is the question, whose marriage have you always admired? Whose marriage have you always admired? I know growing up, I was thankful and blessed enough to be able to be raised in a two-parent household with my biological parents. And so they modeled a marriage that I've always admired and looked up to. I know that is sadly now the exception rather than the rule, but I'm very thankful and blessed that that's my experience. And so my parents' marriage is always one that I've looked up to, I've admired, and I'm sure that there's people in your life that you have seen marriages that you've looked up to and admired. Whether you're newly married or whether you've been married for many years now, you've probably had people that you've gone to for marriage advice or that you've looked to and you've said, they are someone who I would like to model my marriage after. And so when we think about this idea of honoring your marriage, we all have examples of people that come to mind, people who have been mentors to us, maybe they're family members, maybe they're strangers that you just looked at from a distance. But one thing that you and I both know is that marriage is not easy. So whether that person looks like they have the picture-perfect marriage or not, we both know that marriage is hard work. We know that honoring your spouse, your husband, your wife, it's easy to say, but it's a lot different to actually do. It takes hard work and patience and diligence and trusting in God because while you love your spouse, you don't always like them. And so that's something that we have to deal with each and every day. And so how, in this lesson we're going to see today, what are some ways or what are some different points or aspects from the life of David that we can look at in our own life? We can learn from his mistakes and we can honor our marriage because that ultimately honors God. So we're going to be in this, like I said, 2 Samuel chapter 11. If you have your Bibles that you want to turn to so you can follow along, that would be great. And so we're going to look at first 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through 5. And it says this: In the spring, when kings march out to war, David sent Joab with his officers and all of Israel. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and strolled around on the roof of the palaces. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing, a very beautiful woman. So David sent someone to inquire about her, and he said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to him, he slept with her. And she had just been purifying herself from uncleanliness, and afterward she returned home. The woman conceived and sent word to inform David, "I am pregnant." So there are several different aspects that we're going to see from this story of 2 Samuel. And we're going to kind of walk through that. Exodus 20:14, the idea of not committing adultery. A question that we're going to think through and ask is this: how would you summarize our culture's view of adultery? Our culture's view of adultery. Again, at the beginning, I said that sadly today, the world that we live in, there is the exception to the rule of a two-parent household, especially with whenever I see students in our student ministry, more than not, either live with their mom or they live with their dad, their stepmom, their stepdad, and there's just not the same biological parents in the household. Maybe that's your home. Maybe that's something that you are coming out of, and you can still honor God in that marriage, but it's different. There are different levels of baggage that comes with that. There's different hoops that you have to jump through if that wasn't the case. And when we look at our society, when we look at our culture, when we look at the idea of somebody honoring the covenant of marriage, I would say, and the first thing we look at is that honoring your marriage is an exception rather than the rule. Because our society tells us this. Our society tells us to listen to what? To listen to our heart. Whatever we do, we're supposed to just do whatever makes us feel good or to be happy. And the pursuit in our culture is to pursue whatever makes us the happiest. When God calls us to pursue Him and to pursue righteousness. We see in the Bible that the heart is one of the most deceptive things and it can't be trusted. And so when we just listen to the idea of listen to your heart, follow your heart, then we're going to see that this idea of honoring your marriage, and you, if you're trying to seek, okay, maybe this is your first marriage and it's something that you're wanting to be an example to others. Maybe this isn't. But you're saying, you know what? I want this marriage that I'm in right now to still be God honoring. Then you have to look at, I'm not going to just pursue happiness. I'm going to pursue God in this marriage vow that I'm in now. Maybe you're not married right now. And so you're looking forward to a future marriage. You need to go on ahead and start laying the foundation of, when I get into that marriage, I want to be able to honor God as best as I can in that. And so the pursuit and what you look after and what you pursue after is not your own happiness, but it's honoring God. It's pursuing God. And as you pursue God and as your spouse pursues God, it's like the triangle. If you're here and your spouse is here and God is here, the farther away you get from God, the farther you're going to be from each other. But the closer you get to God, the closer you're going to be to each other. So as you pursue God, you realize that you're also pursuing one another. But that's the exception rather than the rule. We don't have God honoring marriages. And we see in this idea of what happened in David is he wasn't pursuing God. He was pursuing his own selfish, sinful desires. And because of that, he not only led Bathsheba to dishonor her marriage vows, but he broke Uriah's trust. He broke the trust of his servants who had to go and seek after these different things for him, try to cover this up for him. And we just see a whole lot of different things in David's life. What happened is one mistake, one bad choice led into a snowball amount of bad choices. So we see this idea of, if we're going to want to honor our marriage, we see first that if we truly want to honor our marriage, it's going to be, in today's culture, the exception rather than the rule. We see second, the effort that has to take place. The effort. Now, again, when we look at other people's marriages, so many times it just seems effortless. The love, the kindness, the care that they put in, it just seems like they don't even try and their marriage is just perfect. But you know, just like I do, if you've been married for any extended amount of time, or maybe you've been married for a day, you quickly learn that marriage is far from effortless. It takes effort. It is a choice. You have to choose every single day when you wake up, I'm going to love my spouse more than I love myself. As I pursue God, it's going to take effort for me to do this. And when we're kind of thinking about this idea of honoring our spouse, the same thing in honoring God, our relationship with God requires effort. We have to put in the effort to work in our relationship with God, just like we put in the effort to put in our relationship with our spouse. Here's the truth. We are putting effort into something. Whether it's honoring God or not honoring God, we are putting effort into it. I think about a lot of different ways, and I'm in, student ministry, and so I see students do different things. And so, like, for example, not doing their homework. So if they still want credit on an assignment, then they're texting their friends, or they're looking up the answers online, or they're trying to figure out how to get the assignment and a grade without doing the work. To be honest, a lot of times they put way more effort into trying to get around the system than if they had just put it into doing the work. They would have gotten the results a lot quicker and faster if they'd have just put the effort into actually doing the work than all of this other effort in not doing it. The same is true. We see so many people try to get out of doing jobs, get out of working, and they put way more effort into just trying to lay at the house and receive benefits from other directions than if they'd have just went out and got a job. Guess what? They could have put in a lot less effort and received better benefits if they'd have just put the effort in the right place. The same is true with our relationship with Jesus. The same is true with our relationship with our spouse. We put a lot of time and effort into things that are not beneficial. And then we reap the consequences of that when it comes to our spouses. If we would have just put our effort into our spouse, or if we'd have just put that same effort into our relationship with God, we would have received a lot of reward. Think of all of the effort David had to put into this situation after he was with Bathsheba. If he would have put that same effort into honoring God and to honoring his country, to going and fighting the battle he should have been fighting, he shouldn't have been at home. He shouldn't have been in bed then. He should have been on the front line with his men. That's what he was called to do. He was their king. He's supposed to lead them into battle. Because again, think back. Why was David even king in the first place? In 2 Samuel, we see that David was king because in 1 Samuel, the Israelites cried to God and said, yes, while you're our king, God, we want an earthly king who can lead us into battle. So they chose who? Saul. Well, Saul was not the man after God's own heart. Saul was man chosen, not God chosen. Saul failed, which came David. And so we see chapters and years later, this man who Israel picked to be their king for the sole reason of leading them into battle so they could be like other nations. What is their king doing now? While they're out fighting these battles, he's at home laying in bed. He didn't put that effort that he once did in his youth back to what he was doing now. He didn't put that same effort into leading for God, leading the people he's supposed to lead. And when we see us start kind of slowing down on the effort we're putting forth, we just kind of go into autopilot, then we see that mistakes are made. And if David would have put that effort in the front hand, he wouldn't have had to try to do all of the things that he did later, trying to cover it up. Sending Uriah to the front line, having the man pull back, trying to cover this whole sham up that he tried to cover. If he'd have just done the right things the first time, then all of this extra effort would have never had to be. So a question that's in here is, what can we learn from David's failure in this passage? Is that put our efforts in the right direction, do the right things the first time, put our effort and our energy and our time into our marriages so that we honor them the first time, put our efforts and our energies and our time into our relationship with God and honor Him the first time. Because here's the thing. If we are unfaithful to our spouses, it doesn't have to be a physical unfaithfulness or an inappropriate relationship, but it's just we're not honoring our marriage by the words that we speak to them, the time we're putting into it, the effort we're putting into it. The idea of adultery is not just the idea of you're physically committing this act with another person. It could be that you're just not honoring your marriage because you're not giving to your spouse the things that you promised before them and God that you would give to them. Your love, your time, your effort, whatever it may be. But chances are, and pretty much 100% this is going to be the case, if you're not doing that to your spouse, you're not doing it to God. If you are not putting the effort forward to your spouse, 100% you're not doing it to God, because if you're not honoring your spouse, you're not honoring God. You're running from that relationship with God. You can't shortchange your husband or your wife and then fully give to God what He's expecting from you. That's not how it works. And we see that same thing happened in this story with David. David tried to not be the exception of the rule. He did not put forth the effort in the right way that he should. We see that he made mistakes. So we not only see the exemption. If you're wanting to do this idea, if you're wanting to truly honor your spouse, you're going to be the exemption for the rule, the exception of the rule. You're not exempt. You're not exempt from making mistakes, but I hope that you try to be the exception. I hope you say, you know what? I don't want to be like the rest of this culture of whenever I get tired or whenever I don't feel like I'm in love anymore, I'm just going to give up on it. You have to put forth the right effort. But the last thing is the example. The example that we're setting. What kind of example did David set for his family, for his nation. What kind of example did he set before God? The example that he set was when you get to a high enough position of power, you can lay at home and not still fight the battles. He set the example of when you make a mistake, what should you try to do? Instead of trying to man up, receive the consequences of your actions, and face those consequences, try to cover it up. He led the wrong example in this whole story and situation. Now, David, again, he is known as the man after God's own heart. He was a guy who is in the Hall of Fame of faith. He led Israel faithful for so many years, but he also made mistakes. You, in your life, what kind of example are you leaving behind? Maybe you've been married for a short time, and so you have so many years ahead of you, and you have people behind you that are looking for your example. Or maybe you've been alive for a long time. You've been married for a long time. You're toward the back end of your marriage. You are still setting an example for the younger generation. An example that they're not receiving very much of anymore. So don't take that for granted. So these are kind of some action steps that I would kind of encourage. What can you take from this lesson and how can you apply it? One, honor God by honoring your marriage. Be faithful to God by being faithful through your marriage. And if you're doing that, find a couple younger than you that you can reach out to and help, because you know that it's difficult. Marriage is not easy. So find a couple that you can pour into, that you can mentor, that you can disciple, that you can share in the joys of marriage and all of the successes that you and your spouse have had, but you can also share with the struggles. Because I know this, a lot of times in marriage, when you're arguing, when you're going through different things, you feel like you're on an island all alone. And you feel like if you're vulnerable and you open up about it, that people will be like, why would you struggle with that? Nobody's ever struggled with that. That's what Satan wants us to think, that we are the only ones who's ever gone through this in our marriage that we're going through. So as an older person or someone who is more seasoned in their marriage, find someone younger who you can pour into, who you can walk alongside of, even if it's a couple who's dating that looks very serious and you think that it could lead to marriage. Start pouring godly advice into them, whether they're your family, whether they're just somebody in the church or the community. Pour into the next generation. For those who are maybe in the middle or younger half of your marriage, I'd encourage you, keep your marriage fun. Don't just go into autopilot mode. Seek older people that you can have pour into you and pour into your marriage, that you can go to, not to vent about your spouse, but go to about advice about how you can be a better spouse, who you can get tips from, who you can be encouraged by. And then do things to keep your marriage fresh. Whether it's different conferences. I know that me and Rebecca, we go to the Scott Dawson Evangelism Association Student Pastor Retreat every year, where they literally just spend a few days pouring into student pastors, but pouring into marriages. And it's been very beneficial for us, even in our young marriage that we've had. So whatever it is, just find different maybe conferences you could go to, or find different retreats that you can go to where you don't have your kids, you don't have other people, you can just focus on you and your spouse. You can date them again. I know this. Marriage is hard. Life is hard. It's hard enough for you to think about, how can I try to be faithful to my relationship with God? How can I honor my spouse? How can I honor my marriage? How can I do this? This whole thing is in the Bible for a reason. Examples like David are in the Bible for a reason. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're not always going to honor your spouse like you need to. You're not always going to say the words that you need to. But through all of it, how are you leading by example? What kind of effort are you putting forward? I'm thankful for this. That as unfaithful as I can be to Rebecca many times, in the time that I give her, the effort I give her, the times that I'm so unfaithful in the effort and time that I give to God, God is always faithful to me. God always honors our relationship. God always honors the relationship that I have with Him. And our relationship, mine and Rebecca's, is of that as Christ and His bride, the church. And I know this, He is the best example that could ever be. He is always faithful to you. He's always faithful to me. He never goes looking for somebody else when we're unfaithful in the relationship. He is always there with open arms to accept us back. So if you've been unfaithful to that relationship with God, come running back to Him. Come running back to Him today, because He will be faithful to honor that relationship. And then if you look at your marriage and you're looking at how can I better honor, I'll know this. My relationship with God will never be exactly where it needs to be until I'm gone and in heaven with Him. Your relationship with your spouse will never be where it needs to be until then either. There is always room for improvement. There's always room to be better. So today, ask yourself, maybe even ask your spouse, you might get an answer you weren't expecting. How can I honor my marriage? Thanks so much again for joining us for another day of the Bible Studies for Life lessons. I'm excited that in just a few short weeks, we are going to be meeting again in person for live and in-color Sunday school, and we want you to be there for it. So here are a few dates that you need to just put on your calendar so that you can join with us in these. Sunday, October the 11th at 3 p.m., we're having our open house for the Mac building. Right after that, we're having our church picnic. You do not have to provide an added dish for this like we have in the past. We are providing all of the food, kind of like a Wednesday night meal. We just want you to come, see the new Mac building, and hang out and fellowship with us. So again, that starts at 3 o'clock. I think the meal starts something like 4:30. So come out with us Sunday, October 11th. And then Sunday, October the 18th, we are kicking off Sunday school. I'm excited about it. With that, we will have worship service at 8 a.m., Sunday school at 9:15, and then we will have our second service at 10:30. So note those time changes. 8 a.m. first service, 9:15 Sunday school, 10:30 second service. You don't want to miss out. You don't want to miss out on what God is doing here. As thankful as I am for this online option that we have been able to provide, I'm even more thankful that in a few short weeks, I get to see you in person right here in Sunday school. So if you can, please be with us. Invite your friends. We'll see you again soon. Thanks again for joining in today. God bless.